Welcome to Truth Talk Live.
All right, let's talk.
The truth is, I can't hide it. I can't hold it no more.
A daily program powered by the Truth Network,
This is kind of a great thing, and I'll tell you why.
where pop culture, current events, and theology all come together.
Speak
Your mind.
And now, here's today's Truth Talk Live host.
Welcome to Truth Talk Live. This is Peter Rosenberger. I am so glad that you're with us. 866-34-TRUTH, 866-348-7884. If you want to weigh in, I've got a loaded program today, and I've got two very special guests that I'm thrilled to have on. You know, we've had a kind of a tumultuous 24 hours, wouldn't you say, as a nation. And one of my favorite things to do is study American history, and particularly the history of our nation's government. And I have with me today Jane Hampton Cook. She is a former White House historian and author of War of Lies. She's actually written about 18 books. And the other one is Brandon Showalter. He's a Christian Post reporter and co-author of Exposing the Gender Lie, How to Protect Children and Teens from the Transgender Industry's False Ideology. And I've had many, many articles. In fact, I've got an article in the Christian Post just last week. And they've published a lot of my stuff. And so I'm thrilled to have Brandon here because this is a subject that I really want to mine a little bit in this program. So I want to start with both of you all. Welcome to the program. And Jane, let me start with you first. As a historian, I got to tell you, this is a pretty good time to be a historian, wouldn't you say?
That's right. Yesterday's election was definitely history-making. Donald Trump's victory was probably the greatest political comeback Americans have ever seen. He really brought in new people to his voting bloc, and there's only been one other president who was president, lost re-election, and then ran and won again, and that was Grover Cleveland. And this is and you don't really see this very often in our history, but I think it says a lot about what the American people really want. And they really want America first and Americans to excel in a lot of different areas.
Well, they do indeed. And Trey Gowdy said last night, he said he didn't call it a comeback. He called it a resurrection.
Yep.
Because it was, now I also got to tell you this, let me see. I want to quiz you, Jane, on the Van Buren curse, the Van Buren curse. Do you know what that is?
You know, I don't know exactly what that is.
Well, they say that from
one-term presidents.
Well, Martin Van Buren was the first president, vice president that ran for president that became president. And since then, there's only been one other that's accomplished that, and that was a sitting vice president. There was a sitting vice president that ran for president, and that was
George H.W. Bush.
George H.W. Bush. So the Van Buren curse was up against. I see Nixon did that back in 59 or 60, and I love talking shop with you, Jane. I really do.
Well, and someone compared Trump to Nixon because Nixon had that comeback of his political life, you know, losing to John F. Kennedy Jr. and then winning the presidency in 1968. So that was a little different because he had never been president before 1968.
No, and he was not the sitting vice president when he was running. He did in 59 and in 60. And by the way, that there's a lot of gray stuff clouding that election in 1960, particularly in Illinois.
Yep.
And so I love this topic. What's your initial thoughts? And then I want to get over to Brandon here. But what are your initial thoughts as you watch this thing? Okay, it's not just Trump. Now you got the Senate. It looks like the guy from Wisconsin did not get the Senate seat. It was a nail biter. Rob Brown in Nevada, I don't know, but Trump's going to have a very strong presence in the Senate. How big a deal is that for him moving forward with his agenda?
That is really important because if the House is Republican, like it looks like it's going to be, he'll have all the branches. I mean, all the branches, but he'll have the House and the Senate, and that's his opportunity, his golden opportunity to get his legislation through is now, the next 18 months, and then we'll get into a political season again. And so it's really important. It's very important.
Well, Brandon, you said that you think that the sleeper issue of this whole thing was the transgender industry ideology debacle, I call it. Unpack that a little bit before we go to the break, and then I wanted to let you have a little bit more time on the next segment.
I do think it was kind of the sleeper issue, and I say that because of the political commentary that's coming out today. I've been catching a few of the morning shows as they're doing post-election analysis, and they're talking about all of the money that the Trump campaign spent on an ad that was very effective. It said, Donald Trump is for you and Kamala Harris is for they, them. It was a very effective ad, and it ran in a bunch of crucial swing states. They spent a lot of money on it. But transgenderism, whether you're speaking about men and women's sports, boys and girls sports, or even the chemical and surgical medical aspect of what's being done to children, that's just so unconscionable. That does not pull well at all for the Democrats, and so it was truly a loser issue for them, and so they ran that to great effect. How did that translate into actual votes? That will be hard to say, but I can tell you, having been on the front lines of this beat journalistically, it definitely fed into the narrative that the left has just gone completely off the rails. The idea that we would, alter a child's body in pursuit of something impossible, that of becoming the opposite sex, is absolutely terrible. And then the sports thing really crystallizes it, because Americans love their sports, and they just think it's insane, because it is, to have a man who claims to be a woman participating in a female sports category where he has an enormous, unbridgeable advantage.
In the next block, I want to discuss the transgender congressman from Delaware that is going to be going to Congress on this. But before we go that, how likely do you think the Democrat Party will be to change their feelings on this?
That's $1 million question. I know many Democrats who have absolutely had it up to their ears with this nonsense. I think the LGBTQ interest groups are very powerful, and so to loosen their grip, once a few people start doing it and start to criticize this kind of thing, if they may feel more comfortable criticizing it, there are going to be some crucial things happening in the next couple of months that will sort of test them on that front. Brett Stevens had an article in the New York Times today where he was sort of complaining about that very thing, but we'll have to wait, because LGBTQ ideology is pretty much the de facto religion of the left, so getting people to criticize it might be hard, but some are clearly willing to do so. We'll have to wait and see.
We're going to talk about that some more. We're talking with Brandon Showalter, and we're talking with Jane Cook. More to follow on Truth Talk Live. Don't go away. We'll be right back.
You're listening to the Truth Network and truthnetwork.com.
Welcome back to Truth Talk Live. This is Peter Rosenberger, peterrosenberger.com, and we are glad that you're with us. 866-34-TRUTH, 866-348-7884. I'm talking with Jane Hampton Cook. She's a former White House historian, author of 18 books, one of them including War of Lies. And then also I've got Brandon Showalter, who's a Christian Post reporter and co-author of the book Exposing the Gender Lies, How to Protect Children and Teens from the Transgender Industry's False Ideology. And I want to continue on the thought we had, Brandon. I'll get to you in just a second, Jane. I want you to weigh in on these things. But we've got a transgender member of Congress now from Delaware. Thoughts?
Well, that's a strategic thing. I mean, trans activists have always been trying to make themselves visible in public arenas to try and normalize the idea of being something other than your sex. But of course it's false. And let's just be clear, there is no such thing as a transgender lawmaker. This is a man who claims to be a woman. Now, he may have some very real psychiatric problems. Don't want to make fun of him or anything, but this is a very destructive lie that has been introduced to our body politic and to our culture. And it's not something that I think that we should encourage. I certainly don't believe that anybody should be overtly disrespectful. But the ideology, as it says in the subtitle of the book that I co-authored, is How to Protect Children and Teens from the Transgender Industry's False Ideology. This is about introducing the idea to young people and even children that they can be born in the wrong body. And so this quote-unquote transgender lawmaker is going to be pushing for policies that are very destructive, namely in the medical arena where children are being irreversibly sterilized and maimed in pursuit of something that's impossible. Transgender activism is truly one of the most destructive forces in culture. But I'm not surprised to see that we now have someone who has been elected from a deep blue district, Joe Biden's district in Delaware, where that's now we're going to have someone who's going to be in the federal government. Of course, we already do have someone of that stature in the Health and Human Services Department, the Assistant Secretary of Health, Richard, who calls himself Rachel Levine. So, but that's intentional. The idea behind these LGBT activist groups is to place transgender identifying individuals in places of power so that they can normalize what is, in fact, something that's very destructive, dissociating people from their sex bodies.
You know, Rachel Levine, Richard Levine, now Rachel Levine, is responsible indirectly for Elon Musk buying Twitter. A lot of people don't know that,
true.
but the Babylon Bee made a joke about it, called him the man of the year, and they got banned from Twitter. Elon was so incensed about it that he bought Twitter. The Babylon Bee said, how do we come up with a $41 billion thank you note for that
and
joke?
Here's what's also interesting about that is that Elon Musk had a child who now claims to be trans and has been, put on those drugs that Elon has talked about it. It's a child sterilization program. And so he's personally impacted by the issue. And people do know about the Babylon Bee getting banned from Twitter because of that joke they made about Rachel Levine being Man of the Year. What is less known is that my publication was also frozen out of Twitter when we wrote a news article referring to Rachel Levine, who is male, as a man. We called him a man, and because of that, we were frozen out. And when Elon bought Twitter on December 31st of 2022, we were let back on. But that's less known. The Christian Post was also banned alongside the Babylon Bee within a day or two of each other.
I did not know that. Jane, as a historian, and you're looking at these things, it's happening so fast that it's hard to really kind of keep track. But we're standing at is it fair to say that we're standing at a pretty significant crossroads for the country?
We are, and just for talking about censorship, that is not an American quality. We've championed free speech. Ben Franklin was one of our biggest champions of free speech because he wanted people to be able to debate the truth and to do so openly and to not censor and then come to their own conclusions. And so, the trans agenda is very concerning. And as a parent of a special needs child, I have to think about that as I bring people in to help him and to make sure that there's not an agenda coming from someone. And all parents are having to think about that. And that's not something we had to think about before in that way. And so we're really in a cultural morass of not embracing the truth and not allowing people to express their opinions freely in the internet world at times. And so that's part of the reason why I think the country moved the way it did with this election, is that President Trump has expressed his views on the trans ideology. And, Megyn Kelly went to one of the last rallies, and she talked a lot about it, about, keeping boys out of girls' sports and locker rooms and whatnot. And so people they hunger for the truth, and the truth, needs to prevail.
Well, I think if we look at Romans 1, one of the things that is so alarming when you read that is that, people have no excuse, and the indictment, the damnation of their souls, of who they are, comes from trying to suppress the truth with a knowing lie. That's basically the heart of Romans 1, as I understand it. And all of creation cries out to this, and yet here we are as a nation having. If you've gone back to a friend of mine I was in high school with, and I'm much older than both of y'all, by the way, probably combined, but a friend of mine who was in high school said, if we could go back to 40 years when we were in high school and said, this is what's going to be on the ballot for this election, we'd have looked at ourselves like we were nuts. I mean, who would have thought that we would even having this discussion about free speech, about, transgender kids boys going into girls sports and all the things that we're doing here. And it would have been almost nonsensical to imagine this 40 years ago. And here we are. Jane, do you think we can navigate back?
I think we can. I don't know how it would play out, but I think that to get our bearings again as a country, we need to. And I think that this issue really does unite a lot of moms and dads because they want to protect their children from predators and from dangerous, ideologies. And it is a difficult thing. And I would imagine Brandon has a lot more ideas about how that can be, how we can get back, on the truthful route. Culturally.
Well, on that note, Brandon, what are your thoughts? Can we navigate back?
Well, my view is with respect to the censorship and with respect to gender, this represents a kind of diabolical spiritual evil that is just when you live in these trenches and you see some of the worst stuff and you see children being sterilized and surgically mutilated, you're forced to confront evil in a whole new way. And not to sound trite or cliche, but I genuinely believe that the only real solution that will be long-lasting and restorative is if we have a revival. Like, we need an awakening of hearts and a return to reverential fear of the Lord and holiness of God.
By the way, that's not trite.
You're listening to the Truth Network and truthnetwork.com.
Welcome back to Truth Talk Live. This is Peter Rosenberger. Glad to have you with us. 866-34-TRUTH, 866-348-7884. I am talking with Jane Hampton Cook, former White House historian and author of War of Lies, and I'm also talking with Brandon Showalter, who's a Christian Post reporter, co-author of Exposing the Gender Lie, How to Protect Children and Teens from the Transgender Industry's False Ideology. Before the break there, Brandon, I'm sorry about that. We got I never want to stop and interrupt you because you're just on a roll, and I love what you're saying. Finish that thought a little bit more about, okay, how do we walk this back? How do we walk this back? And certainly I don't think we can do it on our own, can we?
Well, yes, and the point I was making before I got cut off was that this evil is so deep and it's so deeply entrenched that I believe it's going to take a move of the Holy Spirit to dislodge. And I certainly would support any number of sort of potential legal, political fixes wherever possible. There's good policy can be addressed, however, to curtail and ultimately get rid of the ideology from all of our culture. I would like to see it completely eradicated because there's nothing good about it. There's nothing good comes from telling a lie about the sex of your body. But it's so deep that we're going to need hearts to be awakened to the Lord, and ultimately true lasting change can only happen when we return to God's righteousness and his ways. And so that's my ultimate hope. But in terms of policy, I certainly hope that the Supreme Court will, in an upcoming case, which actually centers around Tennessee's ban on doing this chemical and surgical transing of children. A number of states, I think about half of them, have restricted that. And so Tennessee's ban has made it all the way up to the Supreme Court. And so whether or not that law will be seen as constitutional, that'll be adjudicated on December 4th, I believe. So that will probably be held up as constitutional, and so that'll be a major shot in the arm for those who are trying to resist this kind of thing. But there's a lot of work to be done because this is deeply entrenched in our hospital systems. I think lawsuits are going to be, medical malpractice kinds of actions. That's going to be part of it. But ultimately, we need to return to God because this is a particularly evil kind of wickedness that has been unleashed in our nation.
Well, I remember Rush Limbaugh said something years ago when we started normalizing certain sins in this culture, particularly in the homosexual community. He was talking about when allowed homosexual marriage and so forth. He said, it's never going to be enough. There's going to have to be newer and greater levels of deviance in order to have that perpetual victim status. And Jane, what are your thoughts
I think he's
on
onto
that?
something there. Yeah.
Well, Jane, what are your thoughts on that? I mean, as you see it from a historical perspective of where we've gone in this country, and I know you really dealt with more White House stuff, but this is what the president has to do with. This comes across the president's desk of what's going on in the pulse of the people. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, I think a lot about the Great Awakening, that there have been times when we've had revivals and in a resurgence of people coming to God and people coming to Christ. And I think, one of the things that President Trump has talked about is he wants to bring God back in America. And, he wants faith to be great again. And I know there are a lot of religious people around him. I mean that in a positive sense, that there are pastors and ministers who've prayed with him, seeing how his life was changed by God at the assassination attempt, the two of them. And he's got a new lease on life because he sees that God spared him for a purpose. And I think he's going to use that in an effective way, both, when it comes to policy, but also just encouraging faith and making it acceptable again to embrace your faith. And I know the Word of Faith denomination. I hear a lot from that segment of Christianity, and they really do believe that there is a great awakening coming, that's a move of the Holy Spirit, and they're very hopeful, about that for the American people.
Do you? And I'll start with you, Brandon, on this, and then Jane, give you a moment to think on this too. Do you feel like that Christians, evangelical Christians, who have historically been weak to get out in as a voting bloc and vote? We've had some problems with it. A lot of I'm sure you saw the Barna report where like 32 million people who identify as Christians were not voting in the last election, kind of thing. Do you feel like that maybe this is going to start pushing back against that and start encouraging Christians to be more? A lot of times, let me back up here. A lot of times Christians don't want to get their hands dirty in the politics because that's, God's sovereign, God's in control, and so forth. I don't read Scripture that way. I see God saying that for us to get involved in things and be salt and light to a world that desperately needs both. Do you think that we're at that kind of turning point maybe?
I think that some people are realizing because of with respect to the transgender issue, certainly, people are recognizing that, oh, wait a minute, we can't just afford to sit back because evil is at our door. And, I understand how maybe some Christians are hesitant to get into politics because politics can be so dirty. But I would just submit to them that government was God's idea, and we're called to be salt and light in whatever sphere he calls us to. And so I would very much concur with you that it's about obedience to him to serve wherever we can, and that may mean for some to serve in government and in the political realm. There's also a way to do politics very badly, and people write books about that, and I think some Christians have sincere hearts, and they legitimately don't want to participate in the dirty side of politics, but to sort of wash your hands of it and act as though it's almost a sin to be political. No, I think that's the other side. That's equally wrong. But I do think that when you go after children and you see the kinds of harm that's being done now, I think it really lights a fire under many Christians to say, okay, wait a minute, I have to do something. And even if I'm not comfortable being in politics, when your children are being hurt, I mean, what greater cause could there be? And I think that people are feeling that across the board, that we don't live in the same country today that we did 25 years ago, where there was more common ground between the parties, and so things are more polarized. But that's all the more reason that Christians have to engage as thoughtfully and as professionally and as in much of a Christ-like manner as they can. But do it well, but do it.
Well, it goes back to what Jesus said. Anybody that does something to these children, it's better to have a millstone put around your neck.
Amen.
And he wasn't kidding about it. Jane, your thoughts? Same question. Do you think that we're going to see more of a resurgence of people of faith, and not just a generic faith, not just people say, okay, we recognize that everybody's got, their own path to God, that kind of thing. I'm talking about Christians, Bible-believing, professing in the redemptive work of Christ believing. Do you think that we're at that point now where more and more of those are going to start engaging?
I think so. When I was in the political world and I was a White House staffer, there was a group of us who met and prayed, and we had Bible study together, and we were, we were in that sphere, but we were seeking God as we worked in the White House and in government. So there are people in government that are believers, but I think we're seeing too in the film arena, we're seeing more and more Christian movies being made that are reaching the culture in a more broad sense. There's a new movie coming out called The Best Christmas Pageant Ever, and I've seen it. It comes out this weekend. It's a great family film, but it presents the gospel very simply through, and it's put out by Lionsgate. And so I think there's more and more Christians having impact in, the political arena, but also in the cultural arena through film and other things that I think is just growing and the quality is getting better and better. And I think that's an exciting area too that can help impact the culture in a positive way.
We've got just a few seconds before the break here, and it's a hard break I got to go to. But Brandon, what is your next thing that you're working on, that you're as a journalist?
Well, we are currently in the middle of releasing our 4th season of our documentary podcast about the gender ideology plague, and it's called Generation Indoctrination: Inside the Transgender Battle. Next week, I'll have the season finale of the episode where we're exploring what lies ahead. I would very much commend to all of your listeners to go check it out at generationindoctrination.com. That's our landing page. You can also get it on Spotify or wherever you get your podcast, whatever platform you use. But we're trying to tell the stories that have not been heard so much in the corporate press, the mainstream media, because they are quite deceitful on these issues. But we at the Christian Post are trying to give people who are suffering a voice and explaining the harms of what this ideology does and how it functions. So that's more to come on that, and we'll probably have a bonus episode in the week even following next week's final.
Perfect. Well, we're going to wrap it up in the next block. I'm talking with Brandon Showalter, Christian Post reporter, and I'm talking with Jane Hampton Cook, former White House historian and author of 18 books. She's a very prolific writer, and we've got more to go on this tumultuous but exciting time. It's a great time to be alive, and a great time to be Americans. It's a great time to be serving the Lord. This is Peter Rosenberger. This is Truth Talk Live. We'll be right back.
You're listening to the Truth Network and truthnetwork.com.
Welcome back to Truth Talk Live. This is Peter Rosenberger, 866-34-TRUTH, 866-348-7884, peterrosenberger.com. And would love to hear from you. By the way, I've got a lot of things out there for you. If you're a family caregiver, this is National Caregiver Awareness Month. And you heard Trump say in his speech at Madison Square Garden that caregivers have been overlooked too long, and they're looking at a caregiver tax credit, which, by the way, I agree. Caregivers have been overlooked for too long. And as somebody who's done this for 4 decades, I concur. And I'm optimistic about some of the things. But if you're struggling right now as a caregiver, if you go out on my site, I got a thing there that says Caregiver 911. It's a good place to start. There are 65 million family caregivers out there, and I'm, to my knowledge, I'm the only one with any kind of national platform that talks about family members of alcoholics and addicts as caregivers. And it's a chronic impairment. Wherever you find a chronic impairment, you will find a caregiver. And we're talking with Brandon Showalter. We're talking with Jane Cook. Both of these individuals have brought some insights into this, and particularly on the transgender ideology. We're talking mental illness and anyone that would inflict this on a child. And you're dealing. People need help. People need a lot of help. And as we go forward with this, Brandon, this new administration, a lot of things happening in our culture. What are you concerned about, and then what are you optimistic about?
Well, I think if the new administration is going to be addressing the issue, there are a number of things that they can do right away, and that's revamp the Biden administration's reworking of Title IX, which that was the law back in 1972 that enabled, women's sports and educational opportunities. And so the definition of woman was gutted in this current version. But if they could reestablish that along the truth of biological sex, that would be a huge thing that they could do right away. I think, if President Trump's going to make an executive order or sign a law restricting some of this surgery or medicalization on minors, that'll have to go through Congress, and who knows what kind of hurdles they may encounter there. But he's at least said on the campaign trail that he would sign a bill, prohibiting the sexual mutilation of children. So whether that will happen or not, we'll have to wait and see. But I think beyond that, if you can get gender ideology out of the administrative state, out of the Health and Human Services Department, if you can just make a big push against this kind of thing, of get the men out of the women's prisons, federal prison, that's happening as well. So there are a number of different things policy-wise that could be done that I think could, we hope, turn the page and just consign this ideology to the dustbin of history where it belongs. I think we need a cultural reckoning over what this has done, because it's truly one of the most evil things I've ever seen. It's when you institute a lie about the human body and you then enshrine that in our institutions, you wind up hurting a lot of people. And so we need to undo all of that.
Jane, same questions. What are you concerned about and what are you optimistic about?
Well, I think one thing I'm concerned about is for President Trump's ability to move forward with his agenda. We saw the Russia hoax that attacked him during his first administration, and so I'm watching for what the other side is going to do, and I think praying against something like that from being effective again, and the media as well, the mainstream media, they're not accepting this win very well. And so, I'm watching that and how that plays out. But I am optimistic that people came together. President Trump gained in numerous people groups, with Hispanics, with blacks, with women, with young voters. And so I think Americans have had their voice. They've spoken their voice. And so it's time to move forward and let President Trump implement what he promised he would do.
Good words. If people want to find out more about you, Jane, get some of your books and learn more about what you're doing. And by the way, I didn't ask you, what is your next project?
So I am taking my book, American Phoenix, which is about a political comeback of John Quincy and Louisa Adams. And I want to turn it into a TV series. And currently, a really strong Christian production company is looking at it. And we've got some feelers out there to turn it into a series. And John Quincy and Louisa were people of faith. So their faith is very organic to their story. And the book, American Phoenix, is available on Amazon. And so that's my bucket list goal for my life.
I think that's great. Well, if people want to find out more about you, what is the fastest and best, easiest way to do that?
Sure. JaneCook.com is my website. And then once a week, I do a free newsletter at janehamptoncook.substack.com.
Great. And I'll try to tag all these things when I put this out on the podcast. Brandon, same thing for you. People want to find out more about your work. Is the best way to go to the Christian Post and just follow you there, or Twitter, or what? X? Or right. I'm sorry, I call it Twitter. Sorry.
Yeah, it's hard to switch. ChristianPost.com is where you can see the print reporting of my callings. I've got a byline there, which is my name after backslash and then put my name, and you'll see my byline. I'm at Brandon M. Show on X. That's my handle there. And I make some appearances in media every once in a while. So I just be looking for me. I'm making noise here and there and everywhere.
Well, I've actually found you several times, and I was excited that you got to come on, because this is an issue that's very, very near and dear. Some of the things that you talk about, we went into the transgender stuff, but when you're dealing with somebody with severe medical issues and severe disabilities, you watch the way the left in this culture of ours approaches that. You heard before came back from the break, it was Johnny Erickson Tata And Johnny and I have been friends for many years, and this is something that's also very near and dear to her heart, because I just think that it's extraordinary how we've gotten to this place. However, I'm very grateful that we have people that are willing to stand up and push against it like you have done, Brandon. It takes a lot of bravery. And I will say this on a just interesting note. You came to this while you were serving as a custodian at a church, a lot of your journey. And there was a custodian that worked in the sanctuary cleaning when I would practice the piano at my church. And my father was a custodian at his church, and then he was called to the ministry. And this custodian, I used to ask him all the time. I said, "What do you want to hear me play, Mike?" And he said, "Just keep playing, And I would practice. I mean, that's what I do. I'm a pianist. I went back to Nashville. That was a church in Nashville. I went back to Nashville and played for Mike's funeral because he was killed at Covenant Presbyterian Church in Nashville when that shooting came out. But this transgender ideology was in that situation. And I played for Mike's funeral. So when I saw that in your bio, that I didn't know that about you. And I have a very special heart for people who clean the house of God. And I appreciate you taking this fight up. I know it's coming at a cost to you. It is not easy what you do. And Jane, the same thing. I appreciate that you are delving deep into this country to help people understand how we got here. That we do not, we didn't just kind of just show up. I mean, there is a long line of people who sacrificed greatly, who worked hard, who trusted God with brutal realities for us to be able to have what we have here. And both of you have been just incredibly informative and gracious to spend the hour with me, and I thank you.
Thank you so much.
Yes, thanks for having me.
You're quite welcome. I'm going to have you both back on, and we're going to talk some more about this. We've got to run here. This is Peter Rosenberger. By the way, it is National Caregiver Awareness Month. Friends don't let friends caregive alone. It's a hard time. The holidays are always hard, and we sometimes caregivers are struggling with an empty chair. They're in the hospital, been there, done that. They are trying to, this may be the last Thanksgiving, so we got to make it perfect. But for Mama, no, you don't. It's going to be what it's going to be, and it can be great, and you can have great Thanksgiving, great Christmas, and not everything has to be all scripted and sculpted. Nostalgia ain't what it used to be, okay? We don't have to do that. We can just be in the moment and trust that God is with us in this, okay? And it's very important. And if you're struggling as a caregiver, I would really recommend you go out to peterrosenberger.com. Look at the Caregiver 911. Start there. I've got a book out. It's very simple. It's called A Minute for Caregivers When Every Day Feels Like Monday. They're 1-minute chapters. I timed them. And they're so easy you can read them in the bathroom. I know. That's where I wrote it. I'm just kidding. But I want you to know that this is a difficult time. I see this. But you know what? God sees it more than I do. The government's aware of caregivers once a month. God is aware of us 24/7. And he's been aware of you since before eternity. Okay? That's important to remember. Thank you so much again for spending the time with us here. And it's a real treat. It's an exciting time in our country, but it's also a time for us to roll up our sleeves and get to work. These are two people here who are doing just that. They care about what's going on, and they're using the God-given skills that they've had to go and contribute and be a part of this. What can you do? What can I do? Let us do more. Let us put our shoulders to the wheel. Let us work. This country, I mean, one of the things I noticed about Trump, that he outworked everybody. The guy was up at 2:15 in the morning doing the YMCA dance in Potomac and Grand Rapids, Michigan, I think is where it was. And then he's up at 2 o'clock in the morning, 3 o'clock in the morning in Florida giving his acceptance speech. And by the way, Jane, do you live in Virginia?
I sure do.
I could have sworn that he was going to take Virginia. I've been calling that for 4 months. I don't know what happened. It was so close. It was so close. I could have sworn that would happen. But, oh well, here we are. It was, but you know what? The work just begins now. And if we don't do it, who will? Okay? I'm not going to outsource this, and God doesn't want us to outsource this. He calls us to work. Brandon and Jane are doing it. How about you and me? All right, this is Peter Rosenberger. This is Truth Talk Live. We'll see you next time.
Another program powered by the Truth Network.